The most dangerous thief is not the one who steals your money. It is the one who steals your attention, because once it is gone, you rarely notice it missing. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from working too hard. It does not come from lifting heavy things, from running long distances, from staying up through the night to finish something meaningful. It is not the satisfying tiredness that follows effort, the kind that lets you sleep deeply and wake up feeling like you have earned your rest. This exhaustion is different. It is the kind that settles into your bones on a Tuesday afternoon when you have technically done nothing all day. It is the feeling of being somehow both restless and hollow at the same time. It is the strangeness of sitting down in the evening and realizing you cannot account for where the hours went, only that they are gone, and you are left holding nothing. Most people have felt this. Most people have blamed themselves for it, called themselves lazy, unfocused, lacking discipline, not cut out for the things they secretly wish they could build. They diagnose the symptom as a character flaw, when the truth is far more mechanical than that. The truth is this: they are not losing time. They are losing attention. And there is a difference. A profound, life-altering difference. Time is finite and democratic. Every person on earth receives the same 24 hours. But attention, the quality of directed, purposeful, chosen awareness, is something else entirely. Attention is the currency through which time is spent. It is the difference between spending an hour and investing one. And unlike time, attention can be stolen so slowly and so gently that you will stand at the edge of your life and never once remember the moment it was taken from you. This is the story of a man who almost never figured that out. His name was James. He was 31 years old. He worked as a mid-level project coordinator at a logistics company, the kind of job that is hard to describe at parties and easy to forget about the moment you log off. He was not unhappy, exactly. He was what many people are without realizing it. He was postponed. There were things James wanted. Real things. Not the vague, generic ambitions that float through a person's mind like passing clouds, but specific, detailed, quietly tended dreams. He wanted to write. Not for anyone in particular, not yet. Just to see if he could. He had a journal full of half-started essays, fragments of observations about the world that he had always meant to come back to and finish. He wanted to get healthy, not to look a certain way, but because somewhere around age 28 he had started feeling heavier than his body actually was, and he missed the lightness of his early 20s. He wanted to read more. He had a bookshelf of intentions. Philosophy, history, the kind of long-form nonfiction that requires you to sit still and actually think. None of these things were impossible. None of them required unusual talent or exceptional circumstance. They required only one thing: consistent, sustained attention. And that was the one thing James gave away freely every single day without realizing it. His mornings began like this: alarm at 7, phone picked up before he had finished his first conscious thought. Not because he meant to, there was no decision involved, no conscious choice. His hand simply moved, the way it always moved, the way it had moved for years. Notifications. News. Someone's opinion about something that had happened overnight. A few videos, each one selected not by him but by an algorithm trained to understand his weaknesses better than he understood them himself. By the time James made coffee, 40 minutes had passed. He could not have told you what he had looked at. He could not have summarized a single thing he had consumed. The 40 minutes had simply dissolved, the way sugar dissolves in warm water, invisibly, leaving only a faint sweetness that makes you want more. He told himself he would write in the evenings. Evenings came. He was tired. Not physically tired, he sat at a desk all day. He was mentally depleted in the particular way that comes from a mind that has been constantly stimulated but never allowed to focus. A mind that has been tugged in 100 directions and hasn't moved an inch in any of them. He would open his laptop with every intention. And then, Just for a moment, just to unwind, he would open something else first. A video, a thread, a comment section, and the evening would go the way the morning had gone, and James would close his laptop feeling vaguely ashamed and entirely unsure of what had just happened. On weekends, he was going to catch up. On weekends, he was going to make real progress. Weekends arrived with the feeling of possibility and departed with the weight of waste, and James told himself that next weekend would be different, that he just needed to get organized, to find the right system, to be less tired, to feel more inspired. He had been saying this, in various forms, for 3 years. The discovery did not come from a book. It did not come from a motivational video or a productivity course. It came from a single, unremarkable Thursday evening in February. James had sat down to write at 7 o'clock. He remembered sitting down at 7 o'clock. He could remember the specific thought he'd had as he opened his laptop. Tonight, I'm going to finish that piece about the winter I spent in Vermont, the one I've been turning over in my head for 2 years. At 10:30, he looked up. He had not written a single word. He had watched, in sequence, a documentary about deep-sea creatures, 3 separate reaction videos about a film he had not seen, a 12-minute video essay about architecture in the 1960s, a heated political debate between 2 people he did not know, 6 short video clips that he could not have described 10 minutes after watching them, and a live stream of a man repairing antique clocks, which James had stumbled into by accident and found himself watching for 40 minutes because something about it was unexpectedly soothing. He sat there in the quiet of his apartment for a long moment, not feeling guilty, exactly. Something closer to shocked. Because it was only in that moment, in the silence after the screen, that he became aware of something he had never quite noticed before. He was exhausted. And the exhaustion was not physical. It was the exhaustion of a mind that had been stretched thin across 1,000 unrelated things, forced to care briefly and shallowly about deep-sea creatures and political arguments and antique clock gears, and had received nothing in return. No satisfaction. No understanding. No progress toward anything he actually wanted. He thought about the essay he had meant to write. He thought about it the way you think about a person you've been meaning to call for months, with a mixture of genuine affection and creeping guilt. The essay was still there, waiting, patient. But something in James understood, for the first time, that waiting was not a neutral state. Every evening he chose the screen over the page. He was not simply postponing the essay. He was slowly deciding, through accumulated habit rather than conscious choice, that the essay would never exist. He was not failing to write because he lacked talent. He was not failing because he lacked time. He was failing because his attention, the raw, renewable, precious resource that all creation requires, was being spent the moment it appeared, on things that had been specifically designed to capture it. He thought about money, about how you could earn a good income and still end up with nothing if you spent every dollar the moment it arrived, if you had no savings, no investment, no patience for compound returns. Financial poverty, he understood, was often less about earning too little and more about spending without intention. Was this not the same thing? He had been living in a kind of attentional poverty. Not because he lacked a rich inner life, not because he had nothing to give to his own ambitions, but because he had developed the habit of spending his attention the moment it appeared, on the most immediately available, algorithmically optimized, frictionless thing within reach. He opened the half-written essay. He read the last paragraph he had written 8 months ago. And then he closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while, not because he had given up, but because something had shifted in him, and he wanted to feel the weight of it before he did anything else. But the shift did not immediately become a change. That is the thing that no one tells you about realizations. Having one does not guarantee acting on it. A realization is a door. You still have to choose to walk through. For the next several months, James lived in the uncomfortable space between knowing and doing. He knew what was happening to him. He had seen it clearly. And yet the habits of years do not dissolve in a single evening of honest reckoning. His mornings still began with the phone. He had moved it to the other side of the room, a minor architectural adjustment that lasted 4 days before the gravitational pull of the device overcame the friction of walking across the room to get it. He had downloaded an app to limit his social media usage, and then spent 20 minutes scrolling through settings on the very app designed to stop him from doing exactly that. At work, he noticed, for the first time really noticed, the way his concentration had become fragmented. He would be in the middle of a complex task, something that required sustained thought, and without any conscious decision he would open a new browser tab. Not to find anything specific. Simply to interrupt himself. As if his mind had developed such an intolerance for focused effort that it had installed a reflex. Whenever the work got hard, or slow, or demanding, something in him would reach for relief. He began to observe this in other people too. In meetings, colleagues glanced at their phones during presentations about things that directly affected them. In restaurants, he watched families sit in silence around tables, each one sealed inside their own glowing rectangle. On his commute, he counted the number of people who stared at the middle distance of actual thought, and found only 1 or 2. Usually older, usually wearing an expression of calm that he envied without being able to name. He read about what researchers called the attention economy. He learned that the average person, by some estimates, touched their phone over 2,000 times per day. He learned about the engineers and behavioral psychologists who had spent careers, brilliant, dedicated, well-compensated careers, designing systems specifically calibrated to make it harder to stop looking, harder to feel satisfied, harder to want anything other than the next piece of content. He learned about variable reward schedules, the same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines effective. The scroll was not accidental. The infinite refresh was not accidental. The way your heart rate shifted slightly when a notification arrived was not accidental. He was not undisciplined. He was outgunned. But knowing this did not make it easier to stop. The months passed. The essay sat unfinished. The guitar against the wall gathered a thin layer of dust. The books on the shelf remained in the positions they had occupied for a year. And James, who was not lazy, who was not without ambition, who had within him every ingredient needed to build something worth having, moved through his days feeling the particular ache of a person who can see exactly where they want to be and cannot understand why they keep walking in the opposite direction. He began to understand that this was not a small problem. That the accumulation of wasted attention was not, as he had always assumed, emotionally neutral. That every evening he did not write was not simply a day without progress, it was a deposit into a growing account of self-doubt. He had begun to believe, in some quiet and rarely examined part of himself, that he simply was not the kind of person who finished things. That he was a beginner, perpetually. That the ideas in his head were perhaps better left there, protected from the disappointment of inadequate execution. The screens had not only stolen his time. They had, slowly, invisibly, without a single violent act, stolen his confidence. The turning point arrived in the form of an unlikely teacher. James's company had brought in a consultant, a man named Raymond, who was 67 years old, had built 3 businesses from scratch, and carried himself with a quietness that James initially mistook for aloofness. Raymond had no social media presence. He still used a paper calendar. When James first noticed this, he felt a mild superiority, the easy condescension of someone who considers analog methods quaint. They were assigned to work together on a process review that took several weeks. During this time, James had many opportunities to observe Raymond at close range. What he noticed first was Raymond's focus. In meetings, Raymond never glanced at his phone. Not because he was performing attentiveness, but because he simply had no interest in his phone when something more important was happening. He asked questions that were so precisely formed that they made the people being asked feel suddenly, pleasantly obligated to think carefully. He never seemed rushed, and yet he always seemed to be making progress. He had, James slowly recognized, the quality of someone who was entirely where he was. One afternoon, they were waiting together for a delayed conference call. The room was quiet. James instinctively reached for his phone. Raymond did not. He simply sat and looked out the window, and appeared to be doing nothing with such completeness and comfort that James found himself staring. "Can I ask you something?" James said. Raymond looked at him pleasantly. "Of course. You never seem to." James searched for the right word. "You never seem distracted. Even when there's nothing to do. How do you just sit?" Raymond considered this with the air of a man who has given the question some prior thought. "Do you know what attention actually is?" Raymond asked. Not rhetorically. He seemed to genuinely want to know if James had ever considered it. James said he thought it was something like focus. "It's more than that," Raymond said. "Attention is the precondition for everything. For understanding, for creativity, for connection, for love. You cannot do anything of real value without it. And it is not infinite, it is renewable, but it has limits in any given day. Every time you direct it toward something, you are spending it. The question is whether you are spending it on purpose." "I had a mentor decades ago," Raymond continued. "He used to say that your attention is your life's work in its rawest form. Before you write anything, build anything, understand anything, there is simply the act of attending, choosing what you will give your mind to." He said that most people spend their entire lives having this choice made for them by whoever was most interested in making it. "The phone," James said. "The phone. The television. The opinion of the neighbor. The news cycle. The comparisons." Raymond smiled slightly. "It changes shape in every era, but the dynamic is always the same. There are always people who understand that human attention is enormously valuable, and who will work tirelessly to redirect it from wherever you intended to place it. The only protection is to be more intentional about where you place it than they are strategic about capturing it." "But how?" James asked. "It's not like I don't know what I'm doing. I know I'm wasting time. I can't seem to stop." "Because you're thinking about it wrong," Raymond said, without judgment. "You're trying to use willpower against a system that is specifically designed to exhaust willpower. That's a losing strategy. The trick is not to fight harder. It's to change the terrain." James did not transform overnight. Transformation is rarely a single event. It is usually a long series of small, unglamorous choices that, looked at from a distance, reveal a direction. What changed first was not his behavior, but his understanding of what he was actually doing. Raymond's framing had shifted something fundamental. James had always thought of his phone checking, his scrolling, his tab switching as nothing, as absence, as the negative space between productive moments. Now he saw it differently. Every scroll was an expenditure. Every notification answered in the first 5 minutes of his day was a choice. Not a default, not a neutral act, but a choice to spend the first and freshest portion of his mental energy on someone else's agenda. He had been starting each day overdrawn. He began with the mornings. Not dramatically, he did not throw his phone into the river or commit to a 60-day digital detox. He made one change. The phone stayed on the other side of the room until he had done one thing of his own choosing. Usually, this was writing. Sometimes it was simply sitting with his coffee and thinking without interruption, something he had not done on purpose in years. The first few mornings were uncomfortable in a way he had not expected. His mind, accustomed to immediate stimulation, felt restless when nothing arrived. He would pick up his pen and find that his thoughts moved strangely, as if they had forgotten how to operate without external prompting. He would write a sentence and it would feel thin and inadequate. He would stare at the page with a vague anxiety. But he stayed. He had decided, after his conversation with Raymond, that the discomfort was not a sign that he was failing. It was a sign that something was being rebuilt. Over the following weeks, the discomfort decreased. And in its place, slowly and not dramatically, something else appeared. A quality he could only describe as presence. His thoughts, deprived of their usual diet of external stimulation, began to connect in new ways. Ideas that had been living in separate rooms in his mind began to find each other. The Vermont essay, the one he had been carrying for 2 years, began to come clear in a way it never had during those brief, guilty attempts at his desk in the evening. He also began to notice what Raymond had called the terrain. He moved his phone charger to the kitchen. He turned off all notifications except calls. He removed the social media apps from his phone, not permanently, he told himself, just to see, and found that without the friction of having to reinstall them, he simply forgot to look most of the time. He bought a cheap alarm clock so that his phone no longer needed to be in his bedroom at all. These were small adjustments. Almost embarrassingly small. But their cumulative effect was not small. He was redesigning his environment so that his defaults pointed toward what he actually wanted, rather than toward what someone else had decided he should want. He began to finish things. The Vermont essay, which he had always imagined would be this monument, this cathedral of prose, turned out to be a modest, honest, carefully made piece of about 2,000 words. It was not perfect. It was genuinely his. He started the next one before he could think too carefully about it. He picked up the guitar 3 mornings in a week. Not to become a musician, simply because he had forgotten how much the act of playing, badly and for no audience, could quiet the noisier parts of his mind. He read a book, all the way through, without stopping to check anything else, for the first time in 4 years. None of this made him exceptional. It did not make him famous or wealthy or particularly impressive at parties. But it produced something that had been quietly absent from his life for a very long time. The feeling that he was moving in a direction he had chosen. The feeling that his days were, to some meaningful degree, expressions of his intentions rather than accidents of habit. He called Raymond one evening to thank him. "Don't thank me yet," Raymond said, with a lightness in his voice. "This is the easy part. The hard part is that you'll forget. You'll get busy, or tired, or discouraged, and you'll slide back. And then you'll have to decide again whether it matters." "Does it get easier?" James asked. "It gets different," Raymond said. "It becomes less of a battle and more of a practice. Like tuning an instrument. You don't tune a guitar once and expect it to stay in tune forever. You just develop the habit of noticing when it's drifted, and you adjust." Several years passed. James was not a transformed man in the cinematic sense. He did not have a perfect morning routine. He still, sometimes, picked up his phone the moment he woke up and found himself, 20 minutes later, having learned nothing and feeling hollow about it. He still had weeks where everything drifted, where the old habits reasserted themselves with the easy confidence of things that have been practiced for years. But the difference was that now he noticed. And noticing, he had come to understand, was not the consolation prize for failing to stop something. Noticing was the practice. The whole practice, essentially. He had finished 7 essays by the time he was 35. He had started a small blog, not because he expected an audience, but because having a place to put finished things gave the practice a kind of gravity it had lacked when it lived only in journals. A few people read what he wrote. A few of them wrote to him to say that something he had written had landed with them, had expressed something they had been carrying without language. These messages moved him in a way that no amount of accumulated scrolling ever had. Because they were proof of something he had come to believe slowly and with difficulty, that the things you make when you protect your attention long enough to actually finish them have a life that the things you merely consume do not. He thought often about the version of himself from that February evening, sitting in the dark after the screen, shocked by the arithmetic of wasted hours, feeling both clearly seen and not yet ready to change. He thought about that person with neither contempt nor excessive sympathy, just recognition, because that person had not been broken. He had been distracted, and there is an enormous difference. The broken thing resists repair. The distracted thing needs only to be redirected. He came to believe that this was the great unspoken challenge of contemporary life. Not the work itself, not the discipline, not the talent, not the circumstances, but the simple, daily, endlessly renewable question of where you place your attention. Because everything else follows from that. Your understanding follows from it, because you can only understand what you have been willing to attend to with patience. Your relationships follow from it, because you can only know someone you have actually looked at. Your work follows from it, because you can only make what you have been willing to sit with long enough to shape. The people he most admired, not the most famous or the most successful in the conventional sense, but the ones who seemed most solidly themselves, most fully realized, all shared this quality. They were, in their various ways, protective of their attention. Not jealous of it, not miserly with it, but intentional. They gave it willingly and fully to the things and people they had chosen, and they guarded it from the things that would take it without offering anything in return. This was not a secret available only to the disciplined few. It was not a gift of temperament or circumstance. It was a choice, the same choice, available again every morning, requiring no special equipment and no unusual talent. Only the willingness to ask, before you give your attention away, is this where I mean to put it? James did not always answer the question correctly. He doubted he ever would. But he had learned to ask it, and that had made all the difference. The most successful people in any field, writers, scientists, athletes, entrepreneurs, teachers, artists, are rarely the most talented. Often, they are not the most intelligent or the most driven in any raw sense of the word. What they tend to share is this. They have learned, through whatever path led them there, to treat their attention as the finite, valuable, irreplaceable resource it actually is. They have built lives, and in many cases, careers, around the protection of their own capacity to focus. They guard the first hours of their days the way others guard their savings accounts. They are suspicious of anything that wants their attention without offering understanding, beauty, or progress in return. This is not cynicism. It is not the rejection of the world or the denial of pleasure. It is the recognition that a life is made of moments, and a moment is made of attention, and that what you attend to, fully, willingly, with chosen patience, is what your life will ultimately have been about. James's story is not remarkable because of what he achieved. It is remarkable for the same reason all human stories are remarkable, because a person became aware of something they had not been aware of before, and then slowly, imperfectly, stubbornly, began to act differently. That is all transformation ever is. You do not need a dramatic rock bottom. You do not need a mentor who speaks in perfect metaphors. You do not need a perfect morning routine or a 30-day challenge or an app that tracks how much time you spend in other apps. You need only one thing, to notice, with honesty, where your attention is going. And then to ask yourself, quietly and without self-judgment, whether that is where you actually meant to put it. The answer to that question, asked honestly and often enough, will tell you everything you need to know about the life you are building. And the life you could be building instead. The fire does not need to be large. It only needs to be tended.